Good evening. If I could ask some of you in the back if you could move forward, that would be great. I'd like to have a tight crowd in the front. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Edelen. I am a member of Moms Demand Action Rhode Island, and I have organized this event along with Jennifer Boylan of Moms Demand Action Rhode Island and many other moms who are volunteering here tonight. I just wanted to welcome you here and thank you for showing up to watch a film and have a discussion about a very important and crucial topic, gun violence and gun safety in this country. I was very moved and touched and informed by this film, and I'm so glad that you're here to experience it with all of us. I just wanted to say thank you to Sam Rubenstein. He's a Brown University student with Brown Students Against Gun Violence, and he has helped me organize this event. I'd like to thank all the security that is here, and I just wanted to point out a couple things. There are two emergency exits in the back and one on the side here. And of course, please turn off your cell phones as you watch the film. I wanted to now introduce our moderator. She will be moderating the discussion after the film. Judy Van Wick is here. She's a professor of sociology at URI, and she's going to talk a little bit about herself as well as introduce our panelists. Thank you.
I'm Teresa. I'm already getting names mixed up. At least that'll make you all feel better when you address them with the wrong name. My name's Judy Van Wick. Got that one right, at least. I'm a professor of sociology and criminology at the University of Rhode Island. What I study is family violence, and particularly the interaction of family violence, or what goes on in the household, and what's going on outside in the neighborhoods and community. And so I look at those interactions, how one affects the other. Specifically, I've been over the past several years, for about the last 8 years, looking at juvenile delinquents in Rhode Island, male juvenile delinquents, and trying to figure out how their experiences as victims of exposure to violence and victims of direct physical abuse and emotional abuse by their own families, how that affects their behavior as they grow into adults and where they end up. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm your moderator for this evening, which means that I get to help you guys ask questions of the panelists that we have here once the film is ended, and we'll try to address all of the questions that you have. It's a relatively small group, so we may be able to get through all of them, hopefully, but we promise we won't keep you after 10 o'clock tonight, because it is a long evening. First, though, I have a couple questions for you. The first question is, by a show of hands, how many of you would advocate tonight making a law that eliminates all laws against owning guns? In other words, a firearm free-for-all. How many of you would advocate for that? You just made security's job much easier. How many of you, promise my last question, how many of you would advocate for getting rid of all guns? Now, before you raise your hand, this includes for police, for military, for everybody. How many of you would advocate for getting rid of all guns in the United States? There's a few eternal optimists in the crowd. I think it's important to note that most of you didn't raise your hand. That means that, or it signals, I guess I could say, that we probably have a lot more in common than we do have differences. Meaning that there are things we can't agree on. And that's where positive social and legal change has to start. It can't start with two opposing sides standing in a room screaming at each other. It has to start with finding common ground. And that's why we're here tonight, is to find some common ground. For you to get some information, for them to help you through that information, help you to filter through everything that you see tonight, and then bring that information out to the public, the people who aren't sitting in this room, and start to create some common ground for good, positive social change. So right now, let's let our panelists here introduce themselves. Can we start with, are the microphones on?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm Shannon Watts, and I am a mom of 5 who, the day after Sandy Hook, went online and thought, this really impacts me as a mom, as a woman, and so I want to find a Mothers Against Drunk Driving for guns. And I couldn't find anything. I started my own Facebook page, and many of you are sitting here with Moms Demand Action shirts because of that action that I took. But it wasn't, this isn't my story, it's the story of so many Americans who had the exact same idea that day, which is our country is broken, it's time to get off the sidelines, we have to fix it, and the only way we can do that is to become an opposing force to the gun lobby, who for decades has been able to, with a flip of a switch, generate emails and calls and rallies. And here we are, less than 4 years later. We have a chapter in every single state of the country. We have more than 3 million supporters. And we are seeing, because of that, a sea change in gun politics. We are very close to having a national solution to what is a national crisis. In the meantime, we are going state by state and changing state laws. And we are in corporate boardrooms changing corporate policies around guns. It's very much a page out of the playbook of the marriage equality movement. And I'm very grateful to see you all here tonight. It is, I never imagined sitting at my kitchen counter that I would be looking out at all of you, but this is amazing, and thank you for coming.
Hi, my name is Deborah Azrael. I'm a researcher at the Harvard School of Public Health, where I've devoted along with my colleagues. Sorry, I'm notoriously bad at this. Speaking loudly, that is. Where, along with my colleagues, David Hemingway, Matt Miller, and Kathy Barber, we've devoted the last 20 plus years to study the relationship between access to firearms and mortality in the United States, including sort of youth violence and homicide. We do a lot of work on access to firearms and suicide, and more recently have done some work on trying to understand the patterns of mass shootings in the United States. So I'm looking forward to talking with you all.
Good evening. My name is Teresa Tanzi, and I'm a state representative. I am one of those people who is inside the building trying to convince my colleagues that common sense gun laws are a good thing. I've been very privileged to have been able to work with Everytown for gun safety, which is a marriage between many groups that are working for this cause, and they have helped me become a voice that I think can work to influence other fellow reps and senators to embrace the change that Shannon is predicting for us, and I feel it too. I feel that we're on the cusp of something amazing, and it happened a few days ago in Congress, and it happened again in a little piece in our public safety building here in Providence, but there's a movement that's out there, and I just feel privileged to be in office at a time when people are talking about issues that are so important to the life and health and well-being of us in Rhode Island. So thank you.
I'm Bishop Nicholas Knisely. I'm the Episcopal Bishop of Rhode Island, representing, I guess, 55 congregations. I'm not quite sure how many of us there are. People deny being part of the Episcopal Church. I'm very embarrassed. I'm here to become a member of Bishops United Against Gun Violence. It's a group that grew out of the Bishops of Connecticut's response and providing pastoral care to the communities following the shootings in Sandy Hook. And bishops in Baltimore, bishops in Detroit, bishops in Chicago all began to share their stories of the toll that gun violence is taking on our communities where we have our congregations and in the lives and families that we're serving. We represent bishops across the country, clergy across the country, members of the NRA, members who wouldn't dream of belonging to the NRA. We're trying to find common ground, looking for simple, thoughtful ways that we can start to lower the danger that these weapons in their proliferation are causing in families and in communities. One of the gifts we have as being in the church that allows us to cross boundaries and talk to people who might not otherwise talk to each other. And that's been something we've been very active in, so I'm delighted to be here and be invited to be here as part of this panel.
Hi, my name is Laura Bassi. I'm the Survivor Engagement Lead for Everytown for Gun Safety here in Rhode Island. I'm also a survivor. When most Americans think of gun violence, they think of mass shootings, such as the one that will be featured in the film today. But I'm a survivor of very common but quiet type of gun violence, and that is suicide. On Sunday, March 9th, 2003, my brother Jeffrey shot himself immediately following a breakup with his longtime girlfriend. Before he left his house, he grabbed a rifle that he used to go hunting with her brother and her father. My brother was adventurous, popular in school, an athlete, funny, but he was also just 21 years old and very impetuous. A gun was the difference between fleeting, impulsive thoughts and a fatal, irreversible mistake. 64% of the people in this country who die from guns actually die from suicide. From suicides to childhood shooting accidents and homicides, so many gun deaths are preventable through common sense measures, which is, as our moderator pointed out, one of the reasons that we're here today to talk about some of those. I'm very certain that my brother would be alive today if he didn't have immediate access to a gun in a time of great distress. But we live in a culture where firearms are easily accessible without much fear, or certainly at least the respect that they deserve as deadly weapons. For a long time I didn't say anything about my brother's death, and then I realized after Sandy Hook that I was part of the problem, that I was one of many silent survivors of this epidemic, and that I had to do something about it. And so I joined Everytown, I joined Moms, and when I moved here to Rhode Island, one of the very first things I did was I sent an email to our Moms Demand Action chapter leader. I said, I want to join, how do I get involved? And I'm very happy to be here today, thank you.
The first question that I have here is for Shannon. The film outlines the enormity of the issue in the U.S. How would you advise folks to get involved if they're inspired to take action?
Well, I mean, it feels like a big issue because the gun lobby has such a head start, right? So the gun lobby's been around for decades, and they've built up a lot of power and a lot of influence. But as we've seen just in the last month, that can very easily be chipped away at. And frankly, it is as easy as sending a tweet, making a phone call, joining your chapter of Moms Demand Action. By the way, if you wanted to do that, you could text the word JOIN to 64433 and encourage your family and friends to do the same, please. We have a lot of moms who wanted to take more action and to take a leadership position and to get involved because there's something about what we're doing that they find empowering to them, whether it's educating people about Be Smart, which is a program we have where we teach gun owners and non-gun owners about responsible gun storage, which is truly a crisis in this country with children actually shooting themselves and other people. We have people who want to do congressional action. We have people who want to get involved in their state legislatures. We have people who want to work with celebrities on this issue. It just runs the gamut. So if there's something that is compelling to you, whether it's you've been impacted by gun suicide or gun homicide, or you simply want to protect your community, I would encourage you all to join your chapter of Moms Demand Action or your organization that speaks to you. But getting off the sidelines is so key. You know, when we lost the Senate vote on background checks right after Sandy Hook, a Democrat in North Dakota, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who is a mom obviously a woman, who should have voted for background checks because 90% of our constituents support it, said the reason she did not vote for background checks was because she heard so much more frequently from the other side. She had more calls, she had more emails, and therefore she felt like that was the direction she needed to go in. It's up to all of us, all of you sitting in this audience, to make sure that never happens again. That when we have a vote on this again, that they hear more from us than they do the other side, and that only happens if you get involved and use your voices and your votes. And speaking of votes, know who you're voting for. Make this an issue. For me, I'm a single issue voter. I'm not going to worry about the economy or healthcare or education until I know that my 15-year-old son is going to make it home from high school. Until I know my daughters aren't going to be shot in their college classrooms. When that's solved, I'll vote on other things. So when you go to the voting booth and you pull that lever, know if your candidate has an A rating from the NRA, because if they do, that means they support guns for domestic abusers and suspected terrorists and all kinds of other egregious, immoral things. So get educated about the issue too.
Thank you. This one is for Teresa. Do you think that the Second Amendment prohibits the government from enacting laws that keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people like terrorists or serious criminals? Why or why not?
Yeah, I definitely don't think that the Second Amendment limits that. We just have to look at what Antonin Scalia said. I think it was in Heller. There are limitations to what we as citizens should be able to have access to, and we don't allow people to have rocket-propelled grenades. We don't allow people to have, we've drawn the line somewhere, and then they created a whole new market, and we have to adapt our gun laws to the times. And if I can, just to the first question that was asked, what can we do? And check the NRA rating. Don't take for granted that because there's a D in front of the name of your elected official who represents you, that they think the way that you do on whatever your issue is. I hope it's guns. I hope that in 2016 you're voting as a single issue voter on guns, but check it out. And I don't know what the moms can do as far as releasing the NRA rankings, but you would be surprised at who has an A, B, or C. And if your elected official has one of those grades, call them up on it and ask them why. And call them up and ask them to denounce it and to actually fill out the NRA questionnaire one more time and make sure that they get a grade that you find suitable. It's a default thing most of the times. I mean, Representative Agello is here now. I think she and I are proud Fs on this. And it didn't take a thing for me to receive that F. I just didn't fill it out. And word got around, and they get to know us. But, F is the new thing these days when it comes to gun sense voting, and make sure that you are aware of where your electeds stand and that you share that and you challenge them to disavow their NRA rating.
Teresa, I'm afraid that there may be some people in the audience who aren't familiar with what the rating is or where it comes from.
It's a questionnaire that they send out to every single candidate, and today, just at 4 o'clock today was the filing deadline, and all of these brand new candidates are out and they're running, and make sure that they're all going to get these in the mail in the next couple of weeks, and they're either going to send them back in or they're not going to send them back in. The NRA will release these in advance of the November election, and hunt down that list and hold those elected officials accountable.
Thank you. This question is open for any of you to answer. What do you say to people who argue that homicides by guns have gone down over the past 20 years according to the CDC, so there really isn't a gun homicide problem? It looks like you all want to answer.
I would say that a couple of things. One is that, violence has gone down internationally and across the United States for reasons that people don't really understand. And what it clearly isn't is tied to anything about guns. And what we know is that, within the United States, whatever the rate of violence is, where there are more guns, more people are dying. It's easiest to measure for women and children with homicide because we can associate that more closely with household gun ownership, but more women die, more children die, more people die by gun accident, and more people die by suicide. But it's a specious argument, I think.
Deborah, this one is specifically for you. Despite the data, the myth of a good guy with a gun taking down a bad guy with a gun persists. Why do you think this is? And I think this question is particularly pertinent given yesterday's incident that I'm sure you're aware of.
I'm not sure where it's
Not sure.
Incident, but the best data that are available about use of guns in self-defense come from something called the National Crime Victimization Survey. It's clear, it's clear that guns are not used often in self-defense. They don't improve the outcomes when they are used in self-defense. And the counter is all of the dead bodies that we can count, and the gun injuries that we don't count, and the non-injury producing terror that gets produced by guns every day.
Yeah, interestingly, the research on self-defense homicides, it's very clear. It shows that they almost never occur. They're incredibly rare in light of the other statistical information that we had. The incident I was referring to was yesterday. There was an incident where there was, and I can't remember what state it was in. If somebody knows, please inform me, where there was a shooting. It was actually somebody who knew the victim who was trying to kill the victim. And another person, a stranger, did step in with a gun and shoot the offender. That you're going to hear about a lot in the coming weeks. It's going to be plastered all over the news as if it's the norm. And you have to put those things in perspective. That's one case where he could have easily shot an innocent bystander too, because he isn't trained like a police officer is. And so, you just be ready for it, because unfortunately it's coming. Here's another open question for any of you. Is it really possible to achieve gun control with the existence of the NRA? Go ahead.
Yeah, there's more of us than there are of them.
Yes.
They're a small minority in the movie showed the percentage of members who even support, unfettered access to guns, no laws. It's such a small amount. There's just more of us than there are of them. And, this whole good guy with a gun, bad guy with a gun, we're not living in a Western. These are not toys. We're talking about our families, our children, our communities, and it's just so wrong to talk about it, I think, in these terms. It's really careless, and that's part of, my concern is we really don't treat guns with the respect that they deserve. They're deadly weapons, and I think some people outnumber the NRA. I don't have figures, but in a great order. So I think absolutely. I don't think we should even hesitate on that question.
Anyone else like to address that question?
I would just add that it's 5% of all gun owners in America belong to the NRA. That is not a lot of people. And 74% of NRA members actually support closing the background check loophole. It's the gun lobby leadership that has become so incredibly extreme. So, you also have to look at the demographic of who's buying guns. The gun lobby is selling more guns to fewer people. They have convinced an aging white male demographic that they need to have 5 AR-15s and 7 handguns, and that's how they've been able to protect the profit margins of gun manufacturers. That is an aging demographic, as in dying, and they have to sell more guns to women, which is why you see them trying to get you to put a gun in your purse when you go to the grocery store, or in a bra holster, or sell you a pink gun. And it's why they are trying to push guns on college campuses. In 1999, the gun lobby, the NRA, said no guns in schools or on college campuses. Then they realized they had to sell more guns to other people. So now they are pushing guns on campus in every single state in this country, along with guns in K through 12, basically arming volunteers. That is not a public service announcement. That is a craven marketing ploy to make guns normative among your children, so that your children are used to guns being everywhere, or that they become buyers of guns. And so that is why it's so important. You know, as I mentioned, we have a chapter in every state. Last year, we defeated 70 bad gun bills. Guns on campus, guns in K through 12, expanding stand your ground, allowing permitless carry. This year, the sessions that just ended, we defeated 100 bad gun bills. Those are bills that would have sailed through the state houses, because in the past there were no boots on the ground, there was no one showing up in the state house to say, not in my community, not in my state, you don't. And so that is also why it's so incredibly important to get involved, because when there are 100 people on the floor or in the Senate gallery saying no, it changes lawmakers' minds. And when we show up, we win. And so then we will win against the gun lobby.
I just want to add that we're only in session for 6 months out of the year, and 3 nights a week, and I would say 80% of the time, the 2 gun lobbyists were upstairs in the gallery watching us. They wander the halls each and every day, and everybody knows who they are. And we need more moms and dads who care to be up there making themselves known. You all made a difference this year and stopped the bill. Of those 100 bills, one of them was in the Senate this year, the concealed carry, where it would have been significantly broadened. It would have moved a may issue, a concealed carry permit, to a shall issue. And it was painful to be on the House floor and watch it sail through our side, but in the time it went from our side to the Senate side, the police chiefs and the state police all came in, and phone calls were made by activists who were following us at home, and that bill was stopped in its tracks on the Senate side. So it is possible for you all to make a difference, and I can't encourage you enough to show up regularly and be obvious about who you are and what you stand for, and get to know your reps and senators.
Teresa, you pretty much just answered the next question, but I'll read it anyway and see if anybody else would like to chime in. I've given Rhode Island's small size, proximity to many states, and already liberal congressional senators and representatives. I live in West Greenwich, I don't know what you're talking about. What is the best way to affect the largest change in gun laws?
We can make small, effective changes here in this state. And in doing that, I think we learn how to work together. If we're going to be successful, it's going to be because there's a broad-based coalition of different interest groups that come together and in this learn how to work, coordinate, pay attention, get information fed out, get their networks responding to it. And as we learn how to do that, there's a magnifying effect. And I think that's the key thing. Once we know how to do it for the smaller pieces, we can begin to start looking at the larger issues that we have to deal with. The questions about large magazine weapons, the questions about transport weapons across state lines, questions about the intersection between racism and gun violence, all of that will have to come about when we build the network, that we've learned how to work together in the small things.
Those are excellent points. I think too that it's one thing to say that you're for changes in gun laws. If you say that to somebody who knows nothing about it at all, it means nothing. So it's helpful to know exactly how to speak about it. It's helpful to know exactly what the problem areas are so that you can articulate them for those people who aren't really paying attention. And that's how we do it. Anybody else like to respond?
I guess I just would add that, success breeds success, and that one of the things that worries me a little bit is that people really have to be in this for the long haul, because, universal background checks make enormous amount of sense. There's evidence that that they're effective, we're not going to see, mass shootings aren't going to go away after universal background checks. There's fodder out there for pushback from people saying, oh, you passed this legislation and it didn't make any difference. You just have to push further, and there's so many different things you can do. I mean, one of the things that I have thought about a lot is that, in California, they have a gun industry, in effect. 16% of the U.S. population, if you buy a handgun, if you buy a long gun, they know who you are.
Hawaii too, as of last week.
And Hawaii too. And what that means is, when you go back to the sort of black and white thinking that you saw Wayne LaPierre sort of promoting, is that people who, there's this notion that if you pass a background check, then you're never going to change. And the black and white, it's like buying a gun that confers lifetime, mental health and lifetime stability on you. And the truth is, of course, it doesn't. And so in California, what they're able to do is to look and see if people are disqualified from possessing a gun after they've bought a gun, and they're able to go back and get them. And it's not confiscation, it's removing guns from people who aren't legally allowed to have them. And it's those sorts of issues that I think, and those sorts of models in Connecticut, where there are laws that allow you to call the police and say that you're concerned that somebody poses a risk to themselves or someone else. And the police can get a warrant because there's due process, and they can go and they can take people's guns away from them when they're at risk for themselves or hurting somebody else. And sort of there's a whole cascade of potentially enormously beneficial actions that can be taken if there's the sort of momentum that they can gather around things where people believe, people are voting for background checks and the like.
This question is for Laura. Gun violence survivor Sandy Phillips, mother of Jessica Galway, said about the shooter at the Aurora movie theater, "I don't care if he's mentally ill or not. That's irrelevant to me. There are a lot of people that are mentally ill that don't go out and kill people. So I really think it is a disservice." I'm reading it incorrectly. That's what you needed every time. To target the mentally ill and project them in this light. How do you respond with that?
I think she's absolutely right. I agree with her 100%. I think that someone else, again, in the movie, because they did a great job of covering a lot of bases, but, we point to everything except for guns, and it's time that we put our focus on the issue, which is the guns. It's not mental illness. It's not all the other number of scapegoats or red herrings or whatever you want to call it that come up. It's one issue, and the fact that we can't even study it, and the fact that the ATF has to put, that record for abominable. Like, how did that even happen in 2016? There are so many little barriers, and it's all about one thing. It's the guns. So we have to focus on that.
I find it interesting that you say it's the guns. I see it just slightly differently, but in line with what you're thinking. When I first heard about this film, I thought I would use it most likely in my family violence course that I teach. But since seeing the film, I think now it's more appropriate for the white-collar crime course that I teach. Because it's not necessarily the guns, in my opinion. It's not necessarily even the NRA. It's the corrupt politicians. And it's the gun manufacturers. This is a white-collar crime. This question is for Bishop Nick Knisely. Father Michael Pfeiffer says, and this is a quote, "We talked about 5 people or 6 people shot somewhere in a mass shooting or in a mall or at Fort Hood or whatever or wherever, and the whole country is outraged, as they should be. But what happened in a night in Chicago? What happens in one night in Chicago and they call it just another night in Chicago?" Do you agree with Father Pfeiffer? Why or why not?
Oh, absolutely. We as a society are willing to accept losses in minority communities and to ignore the deaths that are happening there as toss away lives. And it's part of the great scandal of who we are as a nation. the way our prison system is constructed, the way we are assaulting inner cities with weapons, and then looking away as nature takes its course. We get outraged and we get upset when people who look like us or people who we can imagine ourselves being like are shot and killed. But when you sit with people in South Providence, you talk to the moms and you talk to the children who are having to be taught what to do when you hear gunfire, because they hear it regularly. And they know, I remember my first time I was in Bridgeport as a young clergy person, and I heard gunfire on the street, and I went to the window to look out, and all the kids started laughing at me. Because they know enough sense, when you hear gunfire, you get down. It really struck me that their life experience is so profoundly different than mine, that they had to be taught by their families, by their friends, and by their parents how to stay alive in a hail of gunfire. Well, for me, it was such an out-of-the-ordinary experience. I was curious about it. We don't talk about that. And when I meet with the families on the South Side, when we meet with the families in Central Falls, and we talk to them about what their concerns are, they're absolutely focused on their desire to keep their children safe. But I don't see many of the people from those communities or neighborhoods here today. And I worry that we are not including their voices and their stories in this work.
May I actually jump in there? So the Survivor Network actually has been working. We've been trying to address this very issue of like who's at the table, who has a voice in this, who has a stake in this. And at the sit-in actually today, we had Diana Garlington. Her daughter was shot in a driveway, and I think that's one way of getting some of these voices heard. The Survivor Network is a really, really powerful group, and we have these same things happening here: cold cases here in Rhode Island, and they don't get the media attention, and they don't get the thoughts and the prayers and so forth. But we are working on building our Survivor Network here in Rhode Island, and we had this National Wear Orange Day, and in the back was this group of women. They all lost kids, all of them, all people of color, lost children, and you know, I think sometimes their energies get focused on going after the police, and they don't see themselves as part of this broader mission. And so one thing I've been trying to do is to try to pull people in and try to help them, you know, find some power in their voice and use their voices to help make a bigger change and to help, you know, give them an outlet too, because they have a lot to say about this, and they have answers too. So
That's wonderful to hear. There are some very practical reasons too. Traditionally, why people who typically, a lot of people who lose family members to gun violence are living in poverty. And for those people, they're working right now. Or they're at home with their children and can't afford daycare.
They're not going to the east side. They're not going to ground.
Yeah.
Not their place.
No, we're not going to live
And so there's some practical things that we all can do to make sure that they become involved by helping them with those practical goals so that they can become involved. It's good to know.
Could I just, there's my longtime colleague David Hemingway has been thinking a lot about the fact that one way you can turn that, not in terms of participation, but in terms of thinking, is that, you know, every gun in the United States virtually was legally purchased. You know, every gun that shows up in Chicago or in Providence and shootings came from somewhere. You know, it was, I mean, one thing that I wanted to mention, we recently did a survey, and it's consistent with other findings. 400,000 guns a year or something on that order are stolen every year. That's a lot of guns that nobody knows where they are, but they all came from someplace. And asking and insisting to know where that gun, you know, who shot the kid on the corner, where was it bought? You know, telling the people in the community it came from. You know, my kid died because, you know, as a result of a bullet from a gun that came from, you know, Westport, Connecticut, or came from Manchester, New Hampshire, it is a way of sort of insisting that connecting the places where people aren't paying a lot of attention to places that are in general much, should be susceptible to the guilt associated with that.
Thank you. The next question, what is the next step that Rhode Island must take to reduce gun violence? How can we help? Well, we've kind of addressed this already, but.
Well, from a Rhode Island perspective, obviously getting involved. I spoke a little bit earlier today about a domestic violence bill that we've been trying to pass in Rhode Island several times. Speaker Mattiello has been the person that has been sort of standing in the way of that. And so using your voices and your votes to address that issue. And Jennifer is the chapter leader. Jennifer, point yourself out one more time. So if anyone wants to get involved in Rhode Island, Jennifer can help you with that. From a national perspective, what we are seeing is a sea change in gun politics. In 2008, neither Hillary Clinton nor Barack Obama wanted to talk about guns at all. In fact, he called her Annie Oakley, and she said she was a duck hunter. Flash forward 8 years, and it's a completely different playing field. It was the wedge issue in the primaries, Democrats fighting on who could be the strongest going into the general election. Now, after Orlando, a filibuster, a historic sit-in, it is going to become, yet again, the wedge issue in the, in the general campaign. So this is our time to shine. We have got to keep up the pressure. Hopefully you've seen some of the work we've been doing. We had all over the country, we had more than 50 sit-ins locally to support the recent sit-in. And Disarm Hate is a hashtag that we've been using. And we're getting ready now. Congress will come back July 5th through the 15th. And we are in close contact with members of the House, members of the Senate. We have some things planned. We're going to keep the pressure up and keep this at the front of the national conversation so that through November, we have momentum going into the election. Hopefully, we will elect a gun sense champion as president. Hopefully, we will have more in the Senate and in the House, and that we can actually pass background checks in 2017. That is actually within our grasp, but we have to keep up the drumbeat and the momentum and the involvement in order to make that happening and hopefully get this across the goal line.
And I would just add that one of the things I like most about Moms Command Action and Everytown for Gun Safety is you can be as involved as little or as much as you want. And little things make a big difference, like a phone call makes a big difference. Showing up at a rally makes a difference. Or you can really go all in. I mean, we can certainly use all hands on deck, showing up at our own state house. And so I think there's some sign-up sheets. We've got Jen here. She's everywhere. I'm here. I'm happy to answer questions. But, join us. And now's the time.
What is Rhode Island's position now on background checks?
Rhode Island, we don't have, we do the criminal background check, the NICS. We don't have the loophole for the gun show, so Rhode Island is actually has some of the more restrictive gun laws. But we just tried to broaden the concealed carry, and we cannot pass a bill in this state that actually disarms convicted domestic abusers, nor can we take guns away from people who are restrained through a court order from contacting the person that they've been abusing, despite the fact that we know that when you leave your partner who's been abusing you, you are at a heightened risk of being murdered at that time. And despite the fact that we know that these mass shootings that are occurring, mass murders, are more and more research is coming out that these are individuals who have exhibited domestic violence in the past. So
Yeah, one point. So we do have universal background checks here, but something Shannon mentioned earlier about carrying to K-12 schools. People don't realize Rhode Island is actually an outlier in the whole country, and that it's legal to carry firearms in K-12 schools in Rhode Island.
Concealed carry.
Yeah, concealed carry. So if that's something that upsets you,
Yes, there are also loopholes with respect to gifting weapons. And so you could be a domestic violent, well, you could be a felon. And if somebody gives you a gun, you're not legally required to report that you have it.
There was something in the paper that, while it didn't pass the legislature, there was change in something that did actually enact that about 2 days after it failed. And
About domestic violence?
about abusers that.
Jennifer, you have the most up-to-date.
It was done not legally, but by procedure.
I don't know what you're referring
It
to.
was in the paper.
I'm not familiar with that either, but I do know that the federal laws, there are federal laws in place, which is unusual where gun laws are concerned. And states, a lot of states, I'm not sure exactly how many, but a lot of states have emphasized those and added onto it, and that's what we're trying to do in Rhode Island as well.
You're federally prohibited from having a gun or purchasing a gun if you're convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, but those crimes are not typically prosecuted by federal prosecutors. Those are state issues, and we need to mirror the federal law to be able to make sure that you lose your guns on the day that you're convicted.
Yeah, also if you are convicted of a domestic violence felony, and even a felony in Rhode Island, you don't have to give up guns that you already own.
Well, that's what was changed.
Right.
That
It
was the
was
issue.
already the law in Rhode Island, you couldn't possess if you had a felony, but they passed a bill that said you had to surrender the gun in 24 hours.
That's it.
And that was presented as an improvement, but many of us who were working on it found it as a disappointment, because that was instead of expanding it to talk about misdemeanors, which weren't included in the law already. So it was a little bit of, it was a bait and switch, basically.
Right, most domestic violence cases aren't federal, so that.
And if you're convicted of a felony, typically you go to jail. If you're convicted of a misdemeanor crime, you get to go home really pissed off to your guns. And I think that that's the critical problem.
We don't have any more questions up here, but we do have some time if anybody else has thought of a question.
Yes, for the 30 minutes represented here, I'm just kind of curious what your take is on a broader culprit to this whole thing, which is the issue of sin in America. And there is a vacation, not as the beach, but vacating churches or synagogues where you do tend to focus on a writ of law, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not do this. Do you see any synergy between the exodus from places of worship where people would have this common code and this rise in violence?
Yes, but not because they're not hearing that they're bad and behaving good because they're being told they're bad. I think what we're seeing is a collapse in community relationships. We have people who don't know their neighbors, people who don't have a healthy social connection in their neighborhood, in their local community, and in that alienation, fear begins to spread. And you become afraid of your neighbor, and you become afraid of the other that you don't know. And it's a very simple thing to convince yourself that you can make the fear go away if you just spend a few $100s and get a gun. That is mostly, in my opinion, is a totem against fear. I wish people went to things, I wish people went to bowling leagues, I wish they joined bridge tournaments, I wish they went to churches, I wish they went to synagogues, I wish they went to the Y more, because I think that kind of interconnection in a community builds the bonds that will keep us from being afraid of each other and really does give us the ability to create the neighborhoods where we won't tolerate the kind of fear and alienation that leads to these kind of shootings.
Just to follow up, do you think that there's an opportunity, say, for organizations such as churches, synagogues, other faith-based organizations that promote love, and you're saying to disarm hate, to step in and reach out to people so that they do not feel that disconnection?
Yes. No, look, I'll let the rabbi give me here, because rabbis are much better at this than I am. We're people of stories. And I'm afraid we've lost the thread of our story, and losing the thread of who we are as a people and the things that make us a people, the compassion and empathy that's at the core of having healthy relationships. We have to turn to places where we find teachings about that. For me, that's always been in a house of worship or in a faith community, but for other people, it's other places. I don't particularly care to get it from Harry Potter, which actually shows, I mean, statistics are showing people who read Harry Potter are much more likely to show empathy and compassion to their neighbors. Cool. I read Harry Potter. I read it to my daughter. She's a much better person than I am. But I think the faith communities do have a role to play in helping to heal that breach. I think we, as a sort of organized body in the community, are a natural place to find allies in this kind of work. Rabbi, you were going to say something much more profound, I'm sure.
So I want to agree with everything that the bishop just said, but I'll add to that religion in America is every bit as complicated as guns in America. Religious leaders and religious organizations and churches and mosques and synagogues have played an important role in the gun safety movement, and a lot of us religious leaders have made this a very important issue that we've worked on. However, before I came to Rhode Island, I served a congregation in Florida, and where I served in Florida, it was incredibly common, especially in evangelical churches, for evangelical churches to promote gun ownership, to do events encouraging people to learn self-defense with guns, encouraging people to buy guns, and encouraging people to advocate for gun rights, because they don't see that as evil. And I'd say that, dividing this topic into people who are good and people who are evil is exactly the same mistake as is being made on the people who are advocates for guns, because they see themselves as good and they see folks who are advocates for gun safety as being evil. We need to get beyond thinking about this as being a good versus evil issue. That kind of thinking is actually the enemy of progressing towards a solution. We need to be able to see in people with whom we disagree, we need to see the points that they're making that are valid. That self-defense is an important issue, but we need to be able to come up with solutions that are common sense, not that vilify our opponents as being evil.
Thank you. I want to take a minute to thank all of the groups that are represented here, but the groups only exist because of the people in them. And so thank all of you for being here. I very much appreciate it.
I was hoping that we could also talk about, at some point, teaching about peace and nonviolence, because we have to give people a choice and it's not taught in the schools. So I feel like, especially from other cultures that do believe in human rights and know their human rights, I think in the US we don't have that. We don't know our human rights. And so I think that would be a strength. It's a little bit of self-promotion because that's what I do.
It didn't look like you had anything to say. That's true.
I also lost my brother-in-law. He was carjacked and murdered on Douglas Avenue. So it's also a cold case. So that's why I teach about peace and nonviolence. But I feel like especially Latinos and African Americans, Asians are highly more impacted in Rhode Island, and we're not represented here or in other groups. And so to me, it's I have this anxiety that that we have to hurry up and get this done. But I think that you're right. This is our time. This is our time.
And there is a difference between focusing on the violence or focusing on the peace.
Yeah.
And I'm glad
That
you
could be a bridge.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, well, it doesn't look like we're done. Sorry, I'm not trying to get you out of here.
It's okay. This can be open for anyone, I guess, but I have 4 kids, and I have a brother-in-law in Idaho who is a cop, and he's very much on the other side of the fence. And anyway, he loves to push my buttons. Like, he is like always, like, he just texted me a picture of what he got his 3-year-old for her birthday, and it was a pink rifle. But I don't know how to like be around him. And then he have any without like he's just pushing my buttons like he wants to fight, and I just like I have to just leave the room. I don't know what to say to him to just.
And it's not a cop versus the rest of us issue. My own father was on the LA Sheriff's Department my whole life, and he is most anti-gun. And it's because of his experiences in law enforcement. I teach courses to people who predominantly, most of the students in my classes, want to be cops. And the first thing I ask them is, do you want to be a cop or do you want to be a peace officer? Because there is a huge difference in the ones who want to be cops. I try to get them to go over to political science or someplace else because they don't need to be in our criminology courses.
He's 25. He lived in Texas for a couple of years. I think he just wanted to get done. He's got lots of guns. It's a gun thing. It's Idaho. It's my husband, thank goodness, got out of it, and he's totally like on this side. And it's really hard. Like when I go visit family, I mean, like it's tearing the family apart. I mean, we can't even. He sends me pictures of those things because he wants me to like get upset, and I'm like, I'm not even going to respond. But I don't know how to be in the same room anymore. Like when we go visit, I just. And when he comes to visit us, he brings the gun, and I tell him, I'm like, we can't. I don't want the gun in my house. He's a cop, so he like literally thinks he has to be with it. And we bought a safe, and I said, Jordan, can you put it in the safe? And he's like, I can't. I just have to sleep with it. And I have 4 kids, and my oldest has ADHD, and he, like, this is just, you can tell I'm just emotional about this.
I understand completely, Sal, and you say to the microphone because.
Well, maybe right now you can't be together. It's not healthy. You're not helping him as he's pressing your buttons, and he's certainly not helping you. And maybe just to say that, if this is how it's going to be, maybe we have to sort of take a time out, and we'll just check in every year at Christmas and see. Set a regular time so you can talk to each other and see if maybe things have changed. My brother is a clergy person, a different tradition, an evangelical. His church gives out a gun to the kid, brings most Sunday school kids to church. He's profoundly wrong. And so I'm going to maintain a relationship with him, despite the fact that I think he's terribly wrong. Because I see other parts of him that I still love. And I think that's the key to how we overcome this. You have to find, and it's how you do reconciliation work. You find a place where you do have common ground, build what relationship you can on that, and kind of keep yourself safe, keep your children safe. And
that's what I think. Like I love being an advocate for this, but what I hate about it is like the fighting. You know.
If this was easy,
it's easy, right? And it's easy to fight, right? It's easy to be divisive, but it's harder to sit down and say, okay, we're both human. What do we agree on? Can we agree on things because we're related? You know, I mean, we're both. This is the human race that we're trying to protect, right?
Right.
You have a right to your life. You have a right to go somewhere and feel safe, right? So can we sit down and find what we have in common, what we agree on, you know?
And I would just also say you're not alone. I mean, is there anyone in here who has not had this exact argument with a family member? Anybody? I mean, I started this organization, my own father wouldn't talk to me for about 6 months, and he's incredibly Catholic, and he thinks, that this is taking his rights away. So I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had this discussion, and you're so incredibly well branded that I have to imagine you're well connected with moms group, and this is a conversation you should have with them. We have so many moms who have said, my dad's bringing his loaded gun and leaving it in a shoebox in my house under the bed. And this wasn't a conversation I thought I'd ever have to have until Sandy Hook. I mean, these things happen, and I think you can talk to other people and how did they handle it, and hopefully get some solace from them.
Way back.
Sounds 35 years of police work. In the front row, continue doing what you are doing, and things will work out. But not all police officers are created equally. Different personalities, but we just have to educate ourselves and get along. Like I said, in 35 years, I've seen so much tragedy. When I retired a year and a half ago, I didn't stop caring. And that's why I belong to the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence. And that's why I try to bring my perspective in educating not only the Rhode Island police chiefs on some of these matters, but helping with the legislation. So, it's a worthwhile cause. I'm a gun owner, but the fact is we have to have those responsible laws passed, so it's a lot safer. None of us want to see a family member taken in second because of somebody who's irresponsible, untrained, in possession of a firearm or any other type of violence.
Can I get your name before we leave? Because I'd like for you to come with my students.
Yes, please. Yeah, and the police officers have been some of the biggest and strongest voices in this fight, and they are so credible at the State House. And you know, you've been able to testify a number of times. I just had a conversation with my own police chief on a traffic-related issue, and I'm going to start to cry now. He closed the conversation by saying, I'm so happy that you're doing the work that you're doing, and I saw the fight you had with the concealed carry, and the police chiefs are behind you. And I never expected him to say anything like that, to think anything like that, but the police have been among our strongest allies, and it is the police that stopped the concealed carry in the Senate. So, yeah, they're not all created equal.
Any other questions? Okay, now, thank you.